Beloved friends, let us come together for a moment of quiet. Before we speak of prayer, before we inquire into its nature, let us rest, simply rest in the awareness that something sacred is already here. Not something to be achieved, not something to be summoned, not something to be earned, but something that is, for many centuries, we have been taught that prayer is an act of reaching out to a God somewhere, somehow, above or beyond, reaching out from a sense of need, a sense of lack, a sense of fear or insufficiency. And so we struggle and we plead and we hope that some higher power might look upon us with favor. But this is not prayer. This is the mind, unaware of its true source, trying to make contact with its own self. In the infinite way, we begin not with words, but with silence, not with asking, but with listening. For prayer does not start with our voice. Prayer begins with a recognition that there is a presence here before any thought, before any request, before any desire. This presence is closer than breath, nearer than hands and feet. It is not brought into being by our effort, nor is it changed by our petition. It is the living activity of God, being itself. And so as we gather, I would ask you not to prepare your mind to ask for anything. Do not prepare yourself to convince God of your worthiness. Do not seek to catch God's attention, for God has never lost sight of you. And in truth, God has never been apart from you. Let us begin instead with a simple realization that prayer does not go out to a far-off heaven. Prayer is the acknowledgement of the heaven already within you. Prayer is the recognition that all which God is now. God is not waiting for our words. God is not waiting for our change of behavior. God is not waiting at all. It is we who wait. We wait for the noise of the mind to subside. We wait for the fear of tomorrow to loosen its grip. We wait for the cloud of separation to dissolve enough for us to perceive even a glimmer of the eternal. And when that glimmer appears, even faintly, even briefly, something within us knows. This is prayer, this stillness, this presence, this quiet certainty that God is not a God who answers from afar, but a God whose very nature is fulfillment, completeness, wholeness, harmony, a God who does not respond because a God who is cannot respond. God does not become anything. God is, and prayer is our realization of that isness. So in this moment, let us lay aside every sense of effort. Let us set down the old belief that God must be awakened, moved, or persuaded. Let us release even the subtle thought that prayer must bring something into our experience. There is no something to bring. There is only the infinite, present, complete activity of God, already functioning as your life, as your being, as your consciousness, if only you will recognize it. In the quietness of this moment, notice how every desire begins to soften. Notice how every problem you carried begins to lose a little of its density, not because the outer world has changed, but because you have touched something deeper than the world. You have touched the atmosphere of God. And so we begin, not with many words, not with emotional strain, but with the simple, profound knowing that prayer is not the act of calling upon God. Prayer is the awareness that God is already here, already complete, already expressing itself as the life we live. Let us rest in that truth, for in that resting lies the doorway to all real prayer. As we continue in this atmosphere of stillness, let us look gently, honestly, at why so much of what we have called prayer has left us weary, discouraged, or confused. It is not because God has failed to hear, it is not because God has chosen silence. It is because the very starting point of most prayer has been mistaken. Traditional prayer, as the world knows it, arises from a belief. I am here and God is somewhere else. I am lacking and God must supply. I am sick and God must heal. I am frightened and God must intervene. This is the consciousness of separation, and as long as we dwell in it, no matter how earnest our words, no matter how sincere our longing, we cannot find true peace. For separation itself is the veil that obscures God. You see, the moment we believe we must reach out to God, we have already concluded that God is not where we are. The moment we attempt to persuade God to act, we have already accepted the illusion that God has not acted. The moment we ask God to bestow something, we have unknowingly declared that God has withheld something, and so our prayers, though heartfelt, are built upon an unreality. There is no separation. There is no distance. There is no interval in which God is absent and must be summoned. Yet the human mind, unaware of this truth, prays as though it is alone in the universe, hoping that its cries will pierce some distant heaven. Think of it this way. If the sun is shining in its fullness, but you place a heavy curtain before your window, you may sit in the dimness and ask for light, but the light has not withheld itself. Only the curtain stands between you and its warmth. So it is with God. God does not withhold light, life, love, harmony, but the belief in separation, the curtain of I am here and God is there, prevents us from experiencing what has always been ours. Traditional prayer fails not because God is unresponsive, but because the prayer itself begins in an assumption that denies the truth of God's omnipresence. You cannot stand in the conviction that God is everywhere present and at the same time pray as though God must come. You cannot know that God is the very life of your being and simultaneously beg for that life to enter. You cannot affirm oneness while acting from twoness. This is why the world's prayers appear unanswered. Not because God has withheld, but because the prayer is rooted in illusion. And so the infinite way invites a shift, a quiet, profound shift from separation to oneness, from pleading to recognizing, from reaching outward to becoming inwardly aware. When you pray from separation, the prayer cannot rise. When you pray from union, the prayer is already fulfilled. Let us pause for a moment here. Close your eyes if you wish. Notice the subtle habit of reaching outward. Notice how the mind tries to stretch towards something beyond itself. That stretching is the mark of separation. Now gently, without force, without strain, withdraw that reaching, let it fall away, and instead rest in the simple truth. Right here, where I am, God is. Not as an idea, not as a belief, but as a presence, alive, whole, complete. As this realization dawns, even faintly, the heart discovers that it has been looking in the wrong direction. The search beyond dissolves. The attempt to persuade God quiets, and what remains is a stillness that whispers, "You were never separate from me." This is why traditional prayer, built upon the belief of a needy human appealing to a distant God, must inevitably fall short. It attempts to solve a worldly problem without first resolving the inner illusion. Only when the illusion of separation is lifted does prayer become prayer. You do not need to cry out. You do not need to convince the infinite. You need only realize the truth that has been true all along. God is the substance of your life, the breath of your being, the light within your consciousness, the presence that never moves because it is already present everywhere. When this truth is felt even slightly, you will understand why asking fails and why recognition succeeds. Beloved friends, separation is the only barrier. And the moment separation is gone, prayer becomes the effortless activity of awareness itself. Before we can speak of real prayer, before we can understand why prayer in the infinite way bears fruit, we must come into a clear and living awareness of the nature of God. For without this foundation, every step we take will be uncertain. We will pray inconsistently, think inconsistently, and live inconsistently, because our conception of God will be divided, limited, or distorted. The nature of God is not a subject for belief. It is not something we adopt because it sounds holy or comforting. It is something we must learn to experience, to feel, to realize at the center of our being. For God is not known through the mind that reasons. God is known through the heart that recognizes. Let us begin here. God is infinite. This means that God is without boundary, without limit, without division. God does not start in one place and end in another. God is not more present in one temple than in another, more available to one group than to another, more active in one life than in another. Infinity knows no degrees. If God is infinite, then God is fully present, fully available, fully expressing right where you are. This is the first truth we must allow to sink deeply into us. God is not approaching. God is not coming. God simply is. Next, God is omnipresence. If God is omnipresent, present everywhere, then there is no spot where God is absent. Not in your home, not in your workplace, not in your distress, not in your darkest hour. Even in the very place where the mind reports fear, disease, or lack, God is there fully, completely, indivisibly present. To believe otherwise is not to insult God. It is simply to misunderstand God. Now, consider omnipotence. If God is all power, then there is no power apart from God. No power in disease, no power in lack, no power in discord, no power in fear. And so when we pray to remove a problem, to destroy a condition, to overcome an obstacle, we are unknowingly granting power to something that has none. We are praying to an illusion. God alone is power, not a power of force, not a power of domination, but the gentle, effortless power of being what God is: life, love, intelligence, harmony, purity, wholeness. And now we approach the heart of the matter. God is one. This is perhaps the most important truth for spiritual realization. God is not many. God is not one among many powers. God is not one being separate from another being. God is one being, one life, one consciousness, one presence expressing itself in infinite ways. This oneness is the key to understanding why prayer cannot be a plea. If God is one, and if you live and move and have your being in that one, then there is no place to pray to. There is only a presence to become aware of. We do not reach out to God, for God is the very substance of our being. We do not call upon God, for God is the essence of our consciousness. We do not ask God to come, for God is the breath within our breath, the life within our life. A wave does not pray for the ocean to come to it. It simply becomes aware that it is the ocean in expression, and so it is with you. When you understand that God is infinite, omnipresent, omnipotent, and one, you can never again pray as one who is separate, one who must reach out for help, one who must change the mind of deity. You will understand that prayer is not an attempt to influence God. It is the quiet recognition of what God already is, and therefore of what you already are in God. Let this truth settle softly into you. God is not a responder. God is a presence. The moment you recognize that presence, your prayer is answered, not because God has acted, but because you have awakened to the activity that was always present. When the nature of God is understood correctly, prayer becomes the simplest of all activities. It becomes resting, knowing, being still long enough for the living presence of God to reveal itself within your consciousness. In that moment, you will discover that prayer is not something you do. Prayer is what happens when the illusion of separation vanishes and the nature of God stands revealed as the nature of your own being. Let us now take a further step inward. We have contemplated the nature of God, and we have seen that God is infinite, omnipresent, omnipotent, one. But unless we understand the nature of the individual, these truths remain theoretical, distant, and abstract. The real secret of spiritual life, the secret behind prayer, healing, harmony, supply, lies in this one revelation. Your true identity is not separate from God, not part of God, not close to God, not dependent on God, but one with God, because God is the substance, life, and consciousness of your being. This is a truth so sacred, so transformative, that the human mind resists it. It says, no, I am a mortal creature. I am a personality with flaws and fears. Surely God and I cannot be one. But this objection arises only from the surface mind, from the conditioned belief in a self apart from source. Let us be clear. The you that is one with God is not the personal ego. It is not the human mind, not the physical form, not the emotional nature. It is the I behind all personal sense, the divine I, the spiritual identity, the Christ nature that is the true self of every individual. When Jesus said, I and the Father are one, he was not claiming a unique privilege. He was revealing a universal truth of being. He was speaking from the I that is the same I in you. The same divine self that lived through Jesus lives as you. The same life that animated him animates you. The same consciousness that healed through him is the consciousness that constitutes your being. This is not poetry. This is spiritual reality. Now, notice what happens when this truth is even lightly sensed. The entire basis of prayer changes. We no longer stand as beggars, as petitioners, as creatures appealing to a power outside ourselves. We stand instead as expressions of God, as individualized activity of the one infinite life. We do not seek God. We are the place where God shines through. We do not call upon God as an outside presence. We awaken to the presence functioning within us. Take a moment now to feel this. There is an I in you that does not grow older, that is not wounded by the past, that is not frightened of the future. It is the same I you knew as a child, the same I you know now. It is untouched by time, uncolored by circumstance, undamaged by experience. This I is the divine identity, the Christ of you, the Son of God expressing itself as individual being. When you pray from this realization, you do not ask God to change anything. You rest in the awareness that God is already being itself as your life, as your supply, as your harmony, as your wholeness. You begin to understand. I do not live my life. God lives. It's life as me. And this recognition, quiet, gentle, inward, is the essence of true prayer. Let me say this plainly. Every problem you face arises from identifying with the human self instead of the divine self. When you believe yourself to be a limited human being, you naturally pray as one. You pray from fear, from lack, from separation. And this prayer bears the fruit of its origin. But when you recognize the divine nature of your being, when you know that your life is God, your mind is God mind, your essence is God. Essence, you no longer pray for anything. You simply dwell in the awareness of what already is. Prayer then becomes an act of remembrance, a return to your own true identity. Let us sit for a moment with this truth. I am not a human being trying to know God. I am divine being, appearing as this individual life. Feel how this dissolves effort. Feel how this quiets fear. Feel how this softens the sense of insufficiency. In that feeling, in that recognition, prayer is fulfilled, for the presence is realized as the very core of your own being. This realization is the turning point in spiritual life. Once you grasp even a glimmer of your divine identity, the old mode of praying, begging, pleading, hoping, falls away like a worn-out garment. You awaken to the truth that the God you sought was the self that was seeking. And from that moment onward, your spiritual life becomes a journey, not of trying to reach God, but of deepening recognition that God has always been living its life as you. Let us now walk softly into one of the most liberating revelations of the spiritual life, a truth at once simple and profound, yet hidden from the world because it cannot be grasped by the reasoning mind. If God is infinite, omnipresent, all power, and one, then we must come to see something that seems startling at first. There is, in truth, nothing to fix. All the fear, all the discord, all the disease and lack that seems so real to the human mind have no actual existence in God. And because God is the only reality, they have no existence in spiritual being. This does not mean we ignore appearances. It does not mean we pretend there is no pain or struggle. It means we recognize that the appearance, the thing the senses report, has no place in the divine reality, and therefore cannot be healed, corrected, improved, or adjusted. You cannot fix what does not exist in truth. You can only awaken from the illusion of it. This is what the Infinite Way calls the nature of error. Error is not a power to overcome, nor a condition to remove, nor a force to battle. Error is simply the absence of spiritual awareness, a mist of human belief dissolved not by effort, but by realization. Think of darkness. You do not open the window to fight the darkness. You open the window to reveal the light that was always present. And in the presence of light, darkness has no power, no substance, no continuity. It simply is not. So it is with the errors of sense. What the human mind calls disease is not a spiritual presence. It is a misconception of life. What the human mind calls lack is not a real condition. It is a misapprehension of the infinite supply that flows from God as your being. What the human mind calls sin, discord, brokenness, injustice, is not a reality in God. It is an appearance in the dream of separation. Let us dwell on this gently. If error had reality, God could not dissolve it. If it had substance, prayer could not remove it. If it had power, God would be challenged. But God is infinite, and infinity leaves no room for a second power. Thus, error is nothing but the shadow cast by the belief in separation. A belief with no spiritual law to sustain it. Now consider what this means for prayer. If you pray to fix a condition, you are declaring that the condition has reality. If you pray to remove an illness, you are granting it substance. If you pray to correct lack, you are acknowledging a power apart from God. And so the prayer cannot rise, for it begins in the assumption that something real must be changed. But when you understand the nature of error, you will no longer pray for God to correct anything. You will pray to realize that nothing in God requires correction. Let us not misunderstand this. We are not dealing in denial. We are dealing in spiritual vision. Denial rejects. Realization reveals. When a discordant appearance arises in the body, in finances, in relationships, in the world, we do not close our eyes to it. We do not pretend it is not there, but neither do we accept it as real. We behold it as a mental concept, an appearance without substance, and we turn inward to the presence. We rest, we listen, we become still, and in that stillness the truth dawns. There is no power apart from God. There is no presence apart from God. There is no reality apart from God. What I see with the senses is not the truth of being, and as this inner recognition becomes established, the appearance begins to dissolve, not because we fought it, but because we saw through it. Do not attempt to fix a dream. Awaken from it. Do not attempt to heal unreality. Recognize reality. This is the essence of spiritual healing, not the changing of conditions, but the changing of perception, not the correction of appearances, but the revelation of truth in every moment, every situation, every discord. The infinite way asks us to remember there is nothing to fix in God, and God is the only reality. Let us pause here. Notice the relief that comes when you release the burden of fixing, striving, overcoming. Error is not a stubborn presence that must be conquered. Error is a misunderstanding that vanishes in the light of awareness. As we continue deeper, you will see why this understanding transforms prayer entirely. Prayer becomes not the attempt to change the outer, but the gentle inner recognition that God is the only presence and the only power. And when this is realized, the appearance must change of its own accord, for it never had a foundation except in belief. Now that we have seen the nature of God and the nature of individual being and the nature of error, we come at last to the heart of our journey together, the true nature of prayer. Prayer, as the world understands it, is the act of asking God for something, for healing, for supply, for guidance, for safety, for help. But this kind of prayer, though sincere, rests upon a fundamental misconception, the belief that God has something we do not have, that God withholds until asked, that God reacts to human need, that God responds to our petitions. Yet if God is infinite, omnipresent, and indivisible, what could God possibly withhold? If God is the very life of your being, what could God possibly give you that you do not already possess in essence? Let me state the infinite way teaching as simply as possible. Prayer is not petition. Prayer is recognition. We do not pray to change God's mind. We do not pray to bend God's will. We do not pray to convince God to intervene. We do not pray to bring God into our experience. God is already fully present. Prayer, then, is the quiet realization of that presence. Real prayer begins the moment we stop asking and start knowing. The moment we stop striving and start resting. The moment we stop speaking and start listening. Listen now, not with the ears, but with the inner receptivity, and you may sense what prayer truly is. Prayer is the atmosphere of God made tangible in consciousness. It is the awareness, however delicate, that a presence is here, a presence that is not separate from your own being. When you turn inward in this way, when you release all demands, when you cease all mental effort, a subtle shift occurs. You feel yourself carried, supported, loved, and known by a presence that is not external, but intimately your very self. This is the beginning of true prayer. Let us explore it further. When you pray for supply, you reinforce the belief in lack. But when you recognize God as infinite substance, not substance to acquire, but substance already expressing itself, you discover supply flowing effortlessly into your experience. When you pray for health, you strengthen the belief that disease is real. But when you recognize the life of God as the life of your being, you behold the body responding to that realization. When you pray for peace, you declare your separation from peace. But when you recognize peace as an attribute of the presence within, you find your mind becoming still without effort. Prayer does not bring something to you. Prayer reveals what has always been yours. Let us rest in that. Now, how do we pray in this way? What does recognition look like? Real prayer unfolds in 4 simple movements. 1. We enter stillness. We quiet the mind. We withdraw attention from the world of appearances. We step out of the noise of thinking. 2. We release desire. We relinquish the urge to improve, fix, attract, or change. We do not want anything from God. We do not seek anything from God. 3. We become receptive. We open ourselves inwardly, not to a message, not to a voice, not to a sensation, but to the awareness that God is here. 4. We recognize. We let the truth reveal itself. Here, where I am, God is. All that God is present. All that God is expressing itself. This recognition is prayer. At times, it may come as a gentle assurance. At times, as a soft inner warmth. At times, as a wordless peace. And at times, as pure stillness without form. But the form does not matter. The presence does. And the presence is always here, not because you have called it, but because it is your very life. When you live in this atmosphere, even briefly, you will understand why asking fails and why recognition succeeds. You will understand that prayer is not something you perform. Prayer is something you become. It is a state of consciousness, a resting in God awareness, a quiet certainty that no matter what the senses report, God alone is the reality of your being. And the moment that certainty dawns, healing takes place. not as a miracle, not as a reward, but as the natural outpouring of realized truth. This, beloved friends, is the nature of prayer. Not words, but awareness. Not asking, but knowing. Not reaching, but recognizing. When this becomes clear, prayer becomes the most effortless of all activities, for it is simply the recognition of what God already is and always has been within you. Up to this point, we have spoken of prayer as recognition, the recognition of God's presence, of the divine nature of your being, and of the unreality of error. But now we come to something deeper, more intimate, more transformative, the practice of the presence. The presence is always here. You cannot bring it. You cannot summon it. You cannot call it forth. You can only become aware of it. This becoming aware, this living, breathing recognition is what we call practicing the presence. Practicing the presence is not an activity of the mind. It is not a mantra, not an affirmation, not a repetition of holy words. It is the quiet realization of a fact. God is here. Where I am, God is. And in that moment, you are no longer a human being seeking God. You are a divine being recognizing itself. Let us walk together into the atmosphere of this practice. You may be sitting in a room. You may be walking on a street. You may be washing dishes. You may be driving a car. It does not matter where you are or what the body is doing. The presence is equally present. Now, gently, without strain, turn inward, not toward the mind, not toward the body, but toward the subtle sense that there is something here, greater than thought, greater than emotion, greater than form. Feel into that. At first, you may sense only a quieting, a softening, then perhaps a spaciousness, then perhaps a warmth, a peace, a gentle assurance. You cannot explain. This is the beginning of practicing the presence. We are not attempting to think spiritually. We are not reaching for a feeling. We are not striving toward an experience. We are simply allowing the presence that is always present to make itself known. And here is the great secret. The moment you turn inward, the moment you consent to silence, the moment you release striving, the presence begins to reveal itself. Not because you have earned it, but because it is what you are. Practicing the presence does not remove your human responsibilities. It does not take you out of ordinary life. Rather, it allows the divine life to flow through every activity. You may be in a conversation, and suddenly you feel that the words are no longer yours, that something deeper, quieter, wiser is speaking through you. You may be in the midst of conflict, and instead of reacting, you find yourself resting in a peace that does not come from you. You may be facing illness, and instead of fear, you sense a presence that remains untouched by the condition. Notice something important. The presence never changes the situation. It changes your consciousness of it. And when consciousness changes, the situation must follow. Now, let us return again to stillness. Practicing the presence is not a discipline measured by minutes or hours. It is a way of living, a way of breathing, a way of relating to existence. It is the habit of turning inward. Again and again, whenever you become aware that you have drifted into mental activity, not with criticism, not with judgment, simply with the gentle recognition. Ah, I forgot. Let me return. And you return to silence, to awareness, to the felt sense that something is here. As you practice this, you will discover that the presence eventually takes over. You do not maintain it. It maintains you. You do not hold to it. It holds you. You do not remember it. It remembers itself as you. This is the great shift. The presence becomes the doer, the thinker, the life, the intelligence. You become transparent, a vessel, a witness to God expressing. This is why Joel would often say, do not try to be spiritual. Let God be God in you. Practicing the presence is letting God be God. It is stepping aside, releasing self-will, releasing human fear, releasing the need to control, and resting in the divine activity that is always at work. The more you practice, the more effortless it becomes. The more effortless it becomes, the more constant it becomes. The more constant it becomes, the more your life begins to reflect the harmony, order, abundance, and peace that flow naturally from realized God presence. This is the living experience of prayer, not words, not thoughts, not requests, only presence, recognized, welcomed, embraced, and lived. We have come now to a sacred moment in our understanding, the moment where we see how prayer is answered, not through petition, not through desire, not through persuasive words, but through the simple, profound recognition of God's presence. When we speak of the answer, let us be very clear. The answer does not come because God has done something. The answer comes because you have awakened. God does not intervene. God does not change the universe. God does not adjust conditions. God does not alter circumstances. God is. And in the presence of realized God, the unreality of error dissolves. This is the answer. Just as the sun does not fight darkness, but simply shines, dispelling shadow by being what it is, so the realized presence dissolves the appearance of discord. The answer, then, is not an act. The answer is a revelation. Listen quietly now, and you will feel this truth. What I sought was never absent. What I prayed for was already here. The answer was present long before the question rose. This is the humility of spiritual living, that God is forever finished, forever complete, forever whole, and we are simply learning to behold that completeness. Now let us examine how the answer appears. 1. The answer appears as inner peace before outer change, before any condition shifts, before any circumstance moves, before anything visible happens. There is always a moment of deep inner peace. It may be only a second, only a breath, only a whisper of stillness, but it is unmistakable. It is the click, the inward settling, the holy assurance that all is well. Not all will be well. All is well. This peace is the answer. The outer change is merely its echo. 2. The answer appears as a dissolving of fear. You may look at the world and find the same conditions still present, but suddenly you are no longer afraid. Suddenly the weight lifts. Suddenly the urgency drops away. And in that moment, healing has already begun. Fear is the only barrier to realization. When fear dissolves, the presence stands revealed, and the appearance must follow. The absence of fear is the presence of the answer. 3. The answer appears as clarity, without effort, without planning, without mental strain. You simply know what to do, or you realize there is nothing to do. Sometimes you are guided to new activity. Sometimes you are guided to rest. Sometimes you are guided to speak. Sometimes you are guided to remain silent. But always the guidance arises effortlessly. God does not think. God knows. And when the mind becomes still, that knowing flows through you like light through a clear window. Clarity is the answer. 4. The answer appears as outer harmony, but outer harmony is not the answer. Conditions may change. The body may heal, supply may appear, relationships may soften, but these changes are not the answer. They are the shadow of the answer. The answer itself is the lifting of consciousness from the belief in two powers to the realization of one. Once you know that God is the only power, the outer harmony is inevitable. The answer is consciousness. The manifestation is its natural unfoldment. 5. The answer appears without striving, without effort, without doing. This is the hallmark of spiritual demonstration. It comes without human effort. You cannot will it. You cannot force it. You cannot hasten it. You cannot delay it. All you can do is rest in the realization that the presence is functioning, the presence is living, the presence is unfolding its own perfection. And in that rest, the answer reveals itself. This is why Joel Goldsmith always taught, stand still, do not outline, do not attempt to make anything happen. Stand still, and the answer emerges. 6. The answer is always present before you pray. This is perhaps the greatest mystery of spiritual life. God answers before you call, not yesterday, not tomorrow, eternally. Whatever appears as healing is simply the removal of a false sense. Whatever appears as supply is the realization of divine fullness. Whatever appears as peace is the awareness of God already established. The answer has already been given. Prayer does not bring it. Prayer reveals it. Now listen closely within yourself. Feel the truth beneath the words. Every answer I will ever need is already present in the silence that lives within me. This silence, this divine stillness, is the well of every solution, the fountain of every healing, the source of every harmony. Once you know where the answer lives, you never again look outward. You turn inward, not to ask, but to recognize, and that recognition, quiet as it may be, is the full and complete answer to prayer. And now, as we come to the close of this journey, let us not think of it as an ending, but as a quiet returning, a turning back into the very silence from which all truth has been spoken, all healing has arisen, and all prayer has been fulfilled. Before a single word was uttered, for all we have explored the nature of God, the nature of individual being, the nature of error, the nature of prayer, the practice of the presence, and the nature of the answer. All of it points to one sacred realization. God is here. God is now. God is the very life of your own being. There is nothing more to find, nothing more to seek, nothing more to attain, only this, to rest in the presence that has been quietly breathing through you since before time began. Let us enter that rest together. Be still now, not with effort, not with discipline, but with the gentle surrender of a child leaning into the arms of a loving parent. For in this stillness, you will discover that the presence is already here, a soft, living radiance within you, needing no invitation, needing no preparation, needing nothing from you except openness. It has always been here. Your journey, your study, your practice, your questions, your seeking, all of it has been leading you not towards something new, but back to what has always been true. The presence is the prayer. The presence is the answer. The presence is the peace. The presence is the life. The presence is the wholeness. The presence is the abundance. The presence is the love. And you, your true self, are that presence in individualized expression. As we rest now, allow the sense of separation to fall away. Allow the effort to dissolve. Allow the mind to soften. Allow the heart to open. And listen, not for words, not for messages, not for signs, but for the silence itself. For the silence is God. And in that silence, every prayer you will ever pray is already fulfilled. Every need is already met. Every question is already answered. Every healing is already complete. Every longing is already satisfied. Every fear is already dissolved. There is nothing more to add, nothing more to seek, nothing more to say, only this. Father, thou art ever with me, and all that thou art is embodied in my very being. Let this truth accompany you into every moment that follows, not as a thought, not as a belief, but as a living presence within you, guiding you, upholding you, unfolding through you. And as you go forth, remember, prayer does not begin with words. It begins with silence. Prayer does not end with results. It ends with realization. And the greatest realization of all is this: God is the only life you have, the only mind you have, the only being you are. Rest in that. Live in that. Walk in that. And let the presence shine through you as blessing, as peace, as light, wherever you go. This is the fulfillment of prayer. This is the infinite way.